Hello, welcome to this week. We are going to go over sound. So let's dive right in. While you are going over this, and maybe while you're reading, consider these questions. How can sound be as expressive as images? Distinguish among recording, re recording, editing, and mixing. What is the difference between diegetic and non diegetic sources of sound? How can music be both diegetic and non diegetic? So, when you think of sound in film, what comes to mind? Maybe write that down. Pause the video and write down what you think. When you think of sound in film, what comes to mind? So Spielberg has said that the eye sees better when the sound is great. Basically, he's talking about films. A lot of times in films, people are more forgiving of visuals than with sound. The visuals can look okay as long as the story's good sometimes, but when the sound is bad, it's really hard to just get into it. And so I think that's what he's referring to when he says the eye sees better when the sound is great. So let's look at sound production at first. Sound production usually has 4 phases: design, recording, editing, and then mixing. The sound process, they design it just like the editor helps with the storyboards and how things are going to be shot. The sound designer, will discuss with the director what kind of sounds they want to hear. Maybe what kind of pitches do we want to hear before each character. It'll help the sounds, maybe the different pitches for different characters or different loudness for different things. Maybe different emphases or moments of silence in the film. They will discuss this using the script. Then, of course, the recording on the day of, and then editing, and then mixing. A lot of times you'll mix the sound, create different sounds or new sounds a lot of times in mixing. So sound design is a state-of-the-art concept pioneered by director Francis Ford Coppola and film editor Walter Murch. Remember Walter Murch, we mentioned him in editing last time. They combining the crafts of editing and mixing. So here's the contemporary concept of sound design. Sound should be integral to all 3 phases of film production: pre-production, production, and post-production, and not an afterthought to be added in post, which is what they initially thought it should be. Most filmmaking, I think before actually The Godfather, they thought of it as kind of just an afterthought, and they kind of had to figure out the design afterwards. And it's actually better to do it beforehand, because that might help you decide how you might introduce a character, which will show that actually later in this slideshow. A film's sound is potentially as expressive as its image. Image and sound can create different worlds, and image and sound are co-expressible. This is now the contemporary idea of sound design. They actually will think about it before they actually start filming. In the sound department, you will usually have a production sound mixer. They are the recordists on a production, in charge of balancing the levels and effects on set. They decide on the appropriate equipment used for the setup and evaluate for any potential noises that could be introduced during a take. They are in charge of a small team of people dedicated to recording production sound, and they review the audio for each take, as would the camera department, in order to determine if any retakes are needed. In the sound mixer usually will have this apparatus which basically takes in all the sound. And then you will have a boom operator. See, this is obviously probably a more independent film, because usually you will have that person in independent films doing both. But a boom operator is usually actually separately holding this boom separately from the sound mixer. Boom operator, they handle the boom, which is a pull-like mechanical device for holding the microphone in the air out of camera range that can be moved in almost any direction. By the way, she's holding it wrong. You're supposed to be holding it, just lifting it off your shoulders. And that's why it actually takes a strong person to do it, because your arms get really, even though they make light booms, your shoulders really start to hurt after like a minute. So yeah, but this is not the proper way of holding it. You would have to hold it above your shoulders to make sure there's no sound coming from the boom. Sound editing. Slate is a big aspect of sound editing. Slating syncs the image to the sounds. This is again, this clap is not just to say, "Hey, it's time to shoot." It's you're literally syncing sound or creating the ability to sync, because when you look at a sound file that's recorded separately, some of you may film with cameras and there's sound in the camera, but it's usually not the best sound. It is usually recorded separately like this, and you're recording someone's dialogue through here. and then you put it together with the footage. Now the thing is, you put it together with the footage, you need a slate. The slate, you'll see that little spike when you clap it in the sound. You'll see a spike in the sound, and you match that to the point when these two clappers come together, and therefore you've created a sync. And that all goes into sound editing. Re-recording is an aspect of sound editing. It's also known as looping or dubbing. The replacing of dialogue, which can be done manually, that is with the actors watching the footage, synchronizing their lips with it, and rereading the lines. This is called automatic dialogue replacement, or ADR. This is known as looping. It's a post-production process that is used to replace dialogue compromised by intrusive sounds or other on-set recording problems. Actors perform new dialogue in a recording studio while watching looped, repeating footage of the moment in question. So they might have a line that they're saying and a plane flew over while they were saying it. And if they decided just keep rolling, we'll do ADR in post. Basically, whatever they said while the plane was going over, they will go over it again in a recording studio and say that line again. You may notice this, especially in older films. They were not as good as they are now. You'll hear kind of the person talking, and then suddenly they sound like they're really close to the mic, and that a lot of times is because they did a form of ADR and just probably didn't mix it as well as they could have. All right. So did you know that in production phase, the only thing that sound department is actually concerned about is dialogue? And why is that? The reason they're only concerned about, in case you're wondering, in figuring that out, is the reason they're only concerned about dialogue is because everything else can be replaced. It's harder to replace actor because, like we said, with ADR, you're going to have to bring them in again and re-record it, and that means you're going to have to pay them again. But knocks on wood, anything that's Foley, anything that's just noises, we can recreate that a lot easier, and we don't need to pay the actor to do it. So when they're filming, they're only concerned with the dialogue of the actors. They're actually not recording anything else unless they're planning on layering it over it at some point later. But dialogue is all they're concerned about because they can recreate everything else. And besides, they also want to design how they want it to sound. But you can't do that with the actors. It's a part of sound mixing as well. Sound mixing is the process of combining all the different individual edited tracks of dialogue, sound effects, music, and so forth into one composite soundtrack to play in sync with the edited picture. That's sound mixing is basically you're having different layers of track layers of soundtrack basically when you're editing. Just to stay on that for a moment, usually you want to have different soundtracks because you have one track is the dialogue, another track is the sound effects, another track is the music, and maybe another track is the ambient, the background sounds of just like air blowing. Say you want to maybe change some of the sound effects of cups and footsteps. If they were all on the same track, then when you messed with the sound of the footsteps, you would also be messing with the dialogue. So say you just want to keep the dialogue separately, then you can start messing around with the sound effects on the sound effects track. That's why you want to all keep it all separate. And then sound mixing is involved with having all those different tracks, like it says, a track for dialogue, sound effects, music, and so forth. Let's look at some audio characteristics. This all goes into design a lot of the time. So audio characteristics, there's different kinds. Pitch is one, which is the level of sound, which is defined by its frequency, the speed of sound waves produced. Pitch is described as either high or low. So you might have different sounds with high-pitched sounds or low-pitched sounds. Loudness, the volume or intensity of a sound, which is defined by its amplitude, the degree of motion of the air or other medium within the sound wave. Loudness is described as either loud or soft. Quality, also known as timbre, texture, or color, is the complexity of a sound, which is defined by its harmonic content. Described as simple or complex, quality is the characteristic that distinguishes a sound from others of the same pitch and loudness. Quality, the best way to describe it is, say you might hear a sound that's the same pitch and loudness, like maybe a same note from a piano, but you say you hear that same note with the same loudness and pitchness from a violin. So it's a different quality. The piano and a violin have different qualities. So let's take a look at this scene, and we're going to take a look at maybe what pitches do we notice, or what loudness do we notice, and what consider what. Um, uh, Go ahead and watch it on your own, actually, and I want you to take a note of the different pitch, the loudness, and quality, and what different things in the clip have different pitches or different loudnesses or different quality. Yeah, so when you watch that, how would you describe the audio characteristics? There's a dive bombing plane in the scene, and there's explosions. Describe how would you describe those according to pitch, loudness, and quality? Fidelity is another sound term used in film. Fidelity is basically the faithfulness or unfaithfulness of a sound to its source. You could basically, most of the time in most films, it'll have fidelity. If someone's knocking on wood, it's going to sound like someone knocking on wood or walking on marble. So the only times you tend not to notice that, or tend to notice the difference, is when they have a little bit of non-fidelity or slight change in the fidelity. But let me show you a scene where they definitely use fidelity to maybe to the extreme. Oh, by the way, and if you look at the PowerPoint, we have all these clips here. It doesn't, since this is the sound class, you're going to be hearing it through just me recording it from my computer. If you want to hear it better, go on the PowerPoint and actually go to these links that are in the PowerPoint, and then you'll be able to actually hear the sounds that I want you to hear a little bit more specifically. So this is a little behind the scenes about that shootout scene in Heat, the film Heat.
The gunfire downtown was truly horrifying sounding. And because of the skyscrapers everywhere, it was just deafening. And it would hang in the sky for maybe like 8 or 10 seconds.
We used 800 to 1,000 rounds per take when we had the cops and our criminals going at each other. I mean, it was quite an amazing sound.
In what we do, we replace everything. In movies, every sound you hear is there for a reason.
So we were mixing in 3 stages simultaneously. And the pre-dubs of all the effects for that reel with all the gunshots came to the stage, and Michael said, "That's not the gunshot."
And everybody was in shock. He said, "How can you not, what don't you like about it?" And I knew what he didn't like about it because I was on location, was that it was horrifying sounding. So the big gun shootout that you hear in the movie is all production sound.
Nothing artificial could come close to delivering the fear of the sound that the full load made moving through those automatic weapons, and the way the sound ricocheted off the walls of the buildings of an empty downtown.
So yeah, they're talking about they're using the actual sounds that they use. They weren't using bullets, but they had caps on there. But it created that realistic sound of gunfire. Now, like I said, and they said it too, most of the time in films they don't use the actual sound effects in the on the street. But of course, they actually will record sometimes the sound in case they want to use it as a kind of as an example, maybe, and so they use the real gunfire sounds, and it you might say it created more fidelity than it would have if they used other gunshots. Now, even if they used different gunshot sounds, there's a fidelity to it because they're trying to create a realistic sound. But you'd say they went a little further with the scene to have fidelity. Here's just an example, and again, if you listen to this on the actual clip, you'll be able to hear a little bit of how intense it sounded. And it's a pretty cool scene to watch. Again, I highly Heat is another film I recommend. It's a very good crime film. Definitely intense, and but it kind of leads up to this very big shootout. And think about when you watch that scene. What do you think is the effect of mixing in the actual production sound into the final mix of the shootout scene to maintain fidelity? Audio diegesis is another term for sound production in film. What is diegesis? Hopefully, if you recall when we went over, did we go over? Yeah, in film form, diegesis is the meaning of the It's the world of the film, basically, or technically this is a term used even for in creative writing. It's the world of the story, basically. So it's inside this world, basically, is the diegesis. So when we go and talk about audio diegesis, diegetic sounds come from a source within a film's world. They are the sound heard by both the movie's audience and the characters. Non-diegetic sounds, which come from a source outside that world, are heard only by the audience. Now think of, so non-diegetic sound would be something like the soundtrack, the film's soundtrack, the music, for instance, in the film. That would be non-diegetic sounds because the characters can't hear it. Now here's this clip I want to show from Baby Driver, where this is the same director as Hot Fuzz, which we saw a clip from in the editing, at the end of the editing video. And he's the same director. He tends to like to play around with editing and sound. And here's an example where he is playing around with that and uses music as diegetic and non-diegetic. So we'll just take a look at that real quick.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, I got to tell you about the fabulous, most groovy bell bottoms. Bell bottoms.
So yeah, was the music in that scene diegetic or non-diegetic? And when did the music feel diegetic and when did it feel non-diegetic? So yeah, that's just an example, something you can maybe answer. We can talk about in class, but it's definitely an interesting scene in a way where you kind of had a combination of both. The music itself acted non-diegetic many times, and there was also times where it clearly was diegetic. So another term is on-screen versus off-screen sound. On-screen sound is a form of diegetic sound that emanates from a source that we both see and hear. On-screen sound may be internal sound or external sound. Off-screen sound, a form of sound, either diegetic or non-diegetic, that derives from a source we do not see. When diegetic, it consists of sound effects, music, or vocals that emanate from the world of the story. When non-diegetic, it takes the form of musical score or narration by someone who is not a character in the story. Let's take a look at this clip and see if you can tell what sort of sound it is.
Okay, so what am I doing? Oh, I'm chasing this guy. No, he's chasing me.
So is the narration that piece, is that on-screen or off-screen sound? Because you can hear that the narration seemed kind of, it was in his head at the time. So is that on-screen or off-screen? That would be actually a different kind. This would be what is called internal sound. And that's a form of diegetic sound in which we hear the thoughts of a character we see on screen and assume that other characters cannot hear them. It's also known as an interior monologue, one variation on the mental subjective point of view of an individual character that allows us to see a character and hear that character's thoughts in their own voice, and even though the character's lips don't move. So yeah, that what we saw there is internal sound. You might say it is on-screen sound, but internal sound because it's in his head. Then external sound is a form of diegetic sound that comes from a place within the world of the story, which we and the characters in the scene hear but do not see. Can you think of how a film might show or use external sound? One might think of it as maybe it's, say, a lot of times you'll see this sometimes as a where you might hear the sounds of the next scene, basically. You sometimes will hear the sound of the next scene first before we cut to that scene, and that would be kind of external. It's diegetic, it's in the world, but it's coming from a different place. Let's look at types of sounds. There's different types of sounds. We talked about dialogue, where there's ADR, voiceovers, walla. Walla is basically the sound of a crowd, background crowd. Music, you can have source music or score. Source would be music that's in the story, like maybe someone's playing out of a boombox in the story. Or score is where it's non-diegetic. It's what the composer makes to go along with the film. And then you have sound effects like ambiance, Foley effects. Room tone is really what's gotten is a technical term basically for capturing the kind of just the air moving in the room. It's more of a technical thing just so that you can make dialogue sound kind of go smooth in the film. Foley sound. So Foley is a sound belonging to a special category of sound effects invented in the 1930s by Jack Foley, a sound technician at Universal Studios. Technicians known as Foley artists create these sounds in the specially equipped studios, where they use a variety of props and other equipment to simulate sounds such as footsteps in the mud, jingling car keys, or cutlery hitting a plate. Let me show you, this is a video that just gives you a good sense of Foley and how it's made.
Foley is a craft that goes way back in the vaudeville days. It was invented by a guy named Jack Foley. When they shoot a film, you just have the production and the dialogue, so they're concentrating on the dialogue, so all the sounds throughout the film are lost. So what we do is we go back and recreate those sounds for drama, intensity, make it scary, more intense, or the detail in the film. I saw Foley when I was 16 years old, and I wanted to do that for my career. One of the first films that I apprenticed on was Empire Strikes Back. That one was a landmark for me because that got me motivated to do Foley. So I'm just checking this out, and these are these patented horse hoof things here. And then I'll punch for that grass nurse says, okay, keep going. And he goes by camera. Cool. Okay. Okay, so I just laid down the horse footsteps, and now I'm going to lay down the track of the bridle to go with the feet. We're gonna shoot. You're gonna hear it. It won't sound like that. But check out the screen. Keep rolling a full playback with this is horse, bridle, and Hecker horse snorts. We have to cover the film. First, we do all the footsteps of the main characters, whatever lead actors in the film, and then we do the background footsteps. Then we go through a prop pass, and that's all. Anything that's moving on the screen, pretty much we provide a sound for. It's like a big canvas of sound, and we paint different colors and textures and brush strokes. And when you put all those brush strokes and colors together, then you have a full canvas of sound. Foley is a craft, and a lot of people try it and they fail at it because you just have to have certain qualities that are really hard. It's an art form. You have to have, like I said, the timing and a huge creative mind, because like I say, you're thrown in this room, and you got to come up with this stuff. So I have to use the props that I have that I've acquired over the years. It's all organized on a stage. I have different sections of different props, and there's a closet in the back as well. You got shoes and chains, swords, guns, buttons, gadgets, cameras, just anything that you can imagine. Yeah, I know this looks like basically it's a green can, and you're probably thinking, how do you get to the weight and all that? But right now, Nurses is going to give me through the audio gear. It's going to pitch this down in a lot of octaves, really heavy, real heavy, Nurses. And it's Nurses Gazillion back there. Anyway, and also they obviously have sound effects as well, but this is just a small piece just to demonstrate. Just putting this metal flavors, just one by one, we build these elements, hundreds of sounds for a scene like this, and these are like little paint brush strokes. This is just because the car's coming off a metal ramp. This is just giving you a metallic, ringy metal ramp sound. If it's Spider-Man or it's Arnold Schwarzenegger or whoever it is, whatever that actor is portraying, if he's sneaking, stealthing, or walking big, or he's kicking down a door or whatever, you have to put the energy. That's the main thing in Foley, is that there's a performance, and that's what I try to do when I'm doing Foley.
So yeah, again, as you can see how much detail goes into Foley. It's an interesting process. I've done it myself. It's meticulous, especially when as he talks about doing each footstep, and you literally have to do every footstep. You can't repeat the footsteps. Very rarely can you repeat the sound of a footstep or any sound, because the audience hears it, especially in the same scene. But you literally have to recreate every footstep in the entire film. I've done this before. It's pretty tedious, but Foley is actually pretty satisfying too once you do it. So it takes an interesting mind. It takes a meticulous mind to do it though. But this is what goes into every single film. Silence is another aspect of sound that you can use in film. You might say, like, how you can use that is silence. Silence in this case is usually not absolute silence, but as it says here, silence is the suppression of the vocal environment or musical sounds. Silence can be employed to change the rhythm of the soundtrack or to highlight a single sound. Silence contains both meaning and emotional weight. It can signify a pause or increase the tension in a moment. How do you suppose silence can be used in film? And is it actually total silence? That's something to think about. Here's a scene I'm going to show you from The Birds, which is a Hitchcock film. It's a good film. You might think some of the graphics are cheesy and the idea of birds attacking people, but again, I still recommend you watch the film. It's a good film. And they actually find a good way of making the situation seem scary. But this uses a moment where there's a moment in the scene where they use silence or virtual silence to kind of create tension and emphasis, you might say.
An important man in this town. If you help, they all will.
Help how? What do you want to do?
Mrs. Bundy said something about Santa Cruz, about seagulls getting lost in a fog and then flying in towards the lights.
We don't have any fog this time of year.
Make our own fog.
How do you figure to do
We
that?
can use smoke pots the way the army uses them.
Look!
They're attacking again. Well, Melanie, you stay here. Come on out.
Look at the gas. That man's lighting a cigar.
Hey, you! Watch out! Don't drop that match! Look out! Get out of there!
Mr. Ron!
Watch out!
Mr.
Look out! Look out! Watch out!
So yeah, again, you might think some of the stuff is a little cheesy looking, but it's. I feel like they did a good job of that moment of silence where it shows above the city. Definitely was used, you might say, for creating maybe an emphasis. I'm pretty sure some films have taken that aspect. I'm pretty sure in The Walking Dead, I remember seeing that where, because if you recall in that show, those zombies were attracted to sound and things like that. So there was, I think, a moment, is similar to this, where there was an explosion and it gradually showed the zombies coming in. Because they're attracted to the sound, and similarly, so it kind of created an emphasis as we see now this chaos afterwards, that silent moment. And that's just one way you can kind of use silence to create a rhythm in a sense. Let's show some functions of film sound. The function of film sound, you can have audience awareness, which we tend to see this often. Sound can draw attention to the central figures, actions, or spaces of the shot or scene, or add emphasis. Audience expectations. Through patterns, or by drawing on associations and patterns, sound can establish expectations about what is, has, or will happen. I'll show you some examples. And perspective. Sound can signal perspectives, spatial or temporal orientation. I'm going to show you an example of how you can use audience expectations. I'm going to show you 2 clips from Jurassic Park. And the first clip is introducing the T-Rex here.
Being right all the time. Keep absolutely still. This vision's based on movement.
So there we've heard the T-Rex roar now, so we can recognize this. And again, that entire scene really, again, this is, I think, this really is the best Jurassic Park. The other ones, especially the newer ones, suck, by the way. But this one really captured in this scene just this kind of scariness of the T-Rex, and it even ends with his roar. So you really get in your head the sound of this T-Rex yell represents this scary big entity. So once we get that in our heads, later on in the film, we can hear it and we know what to expect, like in this scene.
I guess it means the power's off.
That's not funny. That was great.
Well, maybe we can.
So yeah, again, similarly, like I mentioned, that now you hear the T-Rex roar and you don't even need to see the T-Rex. And actually, if you watch the film, you recall, after that initial T-Rex scene, you don't see the T-Rex that often throughout it, but you do hear its roar. And it's almost like he kind of took, Spielberg here took almost kind of a note like he did out of Jaws, where in Jaws they used other visual cues to let you know, to kind of see the shark, but we didn't actually see the shark until much later in the film. And similarly here, once you've established the fear of the T-Rex, all you need to do is hear his sound, and that creates audience expectations, basically. Now we hear the sound and we know what to expect. Here's another example of this is of subverting audience expectations. This is from the film 39 Steps, another Hitchcock film, and it's a quick clip. But what happens is a woman finds a woman. We've seen already that a woman has been stabbed and is dead, and this woman basically comes and finds the woman in a room, and she screams. Except we don't hear what we should expect to hear. So that was subverting our expectations. We expected to hear a high-pitched scream from a woman. Instead, we heard a high-pitched sound, but instead it was the sound of the train instead. Now here's an example of perspective. Now again, I recommend if you can get on the PowerPoint and actually go to this clip, because it's a little subtle, because it's a quiet scene from A Quiet Place, but there's a character in this who's deaf, and we literally transfer from the quiet scene of where we hear the ambience of the air to the sound of what she hears, which is not really anything. And you'll see this how it's just showing perspective. in case you haven't seen the film, I won't show you what happens next, but it is a horror film. And although it's the first part of the film, so it wouldn't be much of a spoiler to show you what happens. But yeah, as you can see there, that was a good example of perspective in this, particularly in this character who's a deaf girl. She's deaf, and so we literally go in and out of showing perspective. The time when there's no sound is obviously from her perspective, and you can do this in different ways in films. If you've seen Saving Private Ryan, there's a part where one of the main characters is near an explosion and his ears are ringing, and we show it from his perspective. We hear it from his perspective. Some other functions of film sound are rhythm. Sound can lend rhythm to particular scenes and sequences toward broader pacing of the film. I'll show you an example of that from Dark Knight. Characterization. Sound can shape the way the audience interprets a character's personality, actions, psychological state, beliefs, or emotions. And continuity. Sound can create continuity and coherence in scenes and sequences. And sound can accentuate, it can create emphasis. It can create it can accentuate or strengthen the visual image. So here's an example from The Dark Knight. Again, I've seen this film many times, and if you actually watch the film, you can really get a sense of rhythm. In this particular scene, which is interesting, I read that Christopher Nolan, that actually Hans Zimmer made music for this scene, for the latter part of the scene, but Christopher Nolan decided against it because he wanted it to be more, the sound to be more of the emphasis. And he actually told the sound designer, "You're going to be technically the composer here," and you can kind of hear the rhythm in this scene.
Okay, rack 'em up, rack 'em up, rack 'em up, rack 'em up.
Okay, that's not good.
Now there's a Batman. Oh, you want to play? Come on. Come on. He missed!
So yeah, again, maybe first time watching, you might not hear it, but there's definitely kind of a rhythm. It's just this continual kind of this and that and then that. And then there's even kind of a crescendo in the end. So yeah, there is films can create rhythm with sound in a film. There's even, I remember watching Aliens, the second Alien film. By the way, those are the only two good ones, Alien and Aliens, in my opinion. But the Aliens, there's definitely especially a scene near the end where there's definitely, you can tell there's rhythm with the sound effects. Just like with editing, sound can create rhythm. Here's an example of characterization. How a lot of times the first time you introduce a character, we can create sound. This is why sometimes a sound designer needs to be in the beginning discussions, because they might change the script just enough so that we can add something in there that can maybe be an introduction to a character. This is from Jaws, and this is a guy who's basically offering to his skills to hunt down the shark.
A Hollywood studio.
Come on.
We're also planning to bring in some experts from the Oceanographic Institute on the mainland. Only 24 hours.
I didn't agree to that.
Only 24 hours.
24 hours is like 3 weeks.
You all know me. Know how I earn a living. I'll catch this bird for you, but it ain't gonna be easy. Bad fish. Not like going down the pond chasing bluegills or tommycods. This shark, swallow you whole. Shaking, tenderizing, down you go. And we gotta do it quick. That'll bring back the tourists. That'll put all your businesses on a paying basis. But it's not gonna be pleasant. I value my neck a lot more than $3,000, Chief. I'll find him for 3, but I'll catch him and kill him for 10. And you gotta make up your minds. You wanna stay alive and ante up? You wanna play it cheap? Be on welfare the whole winter. I don't want no volunteers. I don't want no mates. There's too many captains on this island. $10,000 for me by myself. For that you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
So that obviously was the introduction to the character Quint. If you've seen the film, you might say that this introduction here, where he's scratching the chalkboard, is a little indicative of his character. The sound itself is irritating and harsh. And you might say that might have a little, be a proper, appropriate introduction of his character. They end up having to work with him, and at first he's definitely harsh, and he's a little irritating, and it's a little hard to deal with at first. He's not easy to get along with, you might say, at first at least. And that's definitely, how you can use characterization in films with sound. Sometimes you can even use can be representative of objects or people, but this is definitely goes into sound design. And then I'll show you an example of emphasis, how sound can be used for emphasis. Here's a quick scene from The Darkest Hour, this is actually a true story. This is the Prime Minister Churchill during, basically they're almost about to be invaded by the Nazis and from the Nazis in World War II. And this is around when England has joined the war. And basically he's trying to talk about a speech, and there's speeches, a lot of emphasis of his speeches in this film. So you have this kind of emphasis of the typewriter, and it kind of is creating an emphasis. I'll show you that.
Hollywood.
Now it started from the beginning. Let me go to where it needed to be. Oh, hang on. I'm not supposed to have any commercials. I don't know why it's doing that. Sorry about that. I'll just wait for this. Okay.
That we are in the preliminary stage of one of the greatest battles in history, and that many preparations have to be made here at home. Sir, I take up my task with buoyancy and hope, and say to the House, as I have said to those who have joined the government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an old...
So there's obviously an emphasis there on that word sweat and the typing of that word. Probably it's definitely saying that he makes a deliberate choice of every word he says, which is true of Churchill, Winston Churchill. He was very deliberate about some of the words he said, or actually no, many of the words he said and said in his speeches. So there's showing that emphasis there with the sound effect of the typewriter and showing it. So and that's it right now to talk about for sound and sound effects. Again, hopefully it matches up with your reading, and thank you for listening.